buy it here. We don't pay mall rents. Price is right, quality is high. And various charitable groups are selling those items. They share a part of the profit to go back into the local and bona fide charities that they represent.
The airplane that just took off is one of somewhere in the neighborhood of 15,600 or so that were built. But, you know, sometimes these numbers are different in different sources. And Danny, he's laughing already because we know what we're going to say. If our numbers of production numbers of aircraft are different from your numbers, then you're right.
We get our facts from publications by the manufacturers or by the DOD, and a lot of people. And then once that took place, it was a superior aircraft. Not only in looks as it comes in from the right on the straight wing run, but listen to this. You could close your eyes and know that that was a Rolls-Royce Packard Merlin engine. Thank you, General Chuck Yeager.
That deserves some explanation because those Rolls-Royce engines, those Merlin engines were unbelievably good, but they were made by hand and they couldn't keep up with the production necessary to supply the aircraft that they were going to be powering. And so it was the Packard Motor Car Company that came up with the solutions.
They in Detroit, with their production lines, were able to pump out, Rob will tell you, well over 50,000 of those engines when they were needed the most. We talked about the airplane. Let's talk about the pilot, R.T. Dickson. He is a name called the Swamp Fox. Now, the Swamp Fox goes back to the Revolutionary War against the United Kingdom. Rob, tell us some of the history of the guy who was actually the Swamp Fox.
Yeah, the Swamp Fox was a guy that was fighting with the Americans against the British. See, the British were very proper. They fought by the rules. They marched down the line, but the Swamp Fox, he was doing guerrilla warfare. He'd sneak in, pick off the British, and the British hated it. But the pilot of the airplane, James Hoard, in Great Britain, of the Swamp Fox P-51, knew about this story about the Swamp Fox, and as a kind of a poking fun at the British, named his airplane Swamp Fox.
And R.T., coming from the Carolinas, thought it was appropriate to keep that name on the aircraft. Get a load of this. The sun gleaming off the wingtips, the rate of roll, and the great sound of the Packard engine.
Over 400 miles an hour, and this was representative of the little friends, those airplanes that escorted the bombers, the big friends, to their targets and back. And there is a very, very well-known unit of American airmen who broke the color barrier here in the United States.
Pilots, I hate to say, nobody wanted.
They were initially shunned by the bomber crews.
Look at this, a 4-point precision hesitation. R.T. Dickson, flying since he was 3. And, oh yes, he was supervised. Then soloing at the legal age of 16. Started flying air shows back in 1992. The airframe delivered to the 445th Fighter Squadron, Bakersfield, California, back in May of 1945. Served in active and guard units. The last duty station was just south of here, Stanford Airport in Louisville, Kentucky. Went surplus in '57, came out of restoration in 2012, and painted in honor of Will Ford's last mount as he fought in World War II in England in his little na-na-na-na-na to the British.
That's
the
right.
Swamp Fox. Off the deck, up goes the nose. Into the double victory roll.
You want to explain how that worked?
After a pilot came back from air-to-air combat, if he had downed an enemy aircraft, he'd come in low over the home field, buzz it low at a high speed of altitude, and do a victory roll. That meant I got one of the enemy out of the sky today.
Pretty impressive stuff. Back, if I may, to the Tuskegee Airmen, because they there were black men who wanted to fly and fight for our country, and the War Department didn't think black men were smart enough to do it. But political pressure was brought to bear, and they set up in Tuskegee, Alabama, the Tuskegee Institute, and black men proved they could fly, and they did. And initially, though they were shunned by the bomber crews, they soon realized that the Tuskegee Airmen stayed with the bombers. They didn't go off chasing aerial victories. They stayed to protect those bombers, and they ended up being the most requested guys out there. And there is an airplane out here on the airshow circuit that has that name, by request.
There's also a traveling mobile theater that tells the story of not only the cameras on R.T. Dickson and the P-51. Of the over 15,000 of the aircraft that were said to have been manufactured, there are about 150 that still exist worldwide. However, at any given day, probably only 70 or 80 of those aircraft would actually get off the ground and fly. On takeoff, RT was burning 120 gallons of very expensive aviation of West Covina, California, and now with a location outside of Atlanta, Georgia, for their support. And I concur with that. They are one of my great sponsors as well. And also Lift Aviation. R.T. Dickson, in an effort to honor all of those who have served, past, present, and future, R.T. travels across the U.S. to educate and demonstrate the capabilities of the P-51 to future generations.